Welcome to episode 3 of the Custom Build Podcast with
JR.
and Coy. This is going to be a part 2 of Jesse's background story. We pretty much left off in episode 1, which if you haven't listened to, go listen to it, where Jesse was just getting out of pool welding and getting into his first contract, which will lead to the start of JR Metalworks.
Yeah, so the beginning of JR Metalworks.
This is still in Dad's shop, right? We're at home.
Yeah. So I was just doing the side work out of Dad's 30 by 40-ish shop, and I was occupying roughly like a quarter of it when we started, and then it got to like a half and then 3/4, and then that's where we ran into a little bit of a firmly laid out suggestion that I get the hell out because I was taking up too much room and it was getting to be winter and he needed to be able to thaw out the tractor and the truck and all that stuff in there. So what got us to that point? You know, where did JR Metalworks really begin? So when I got done with the pool gig, part of the reason that I was able to stop that is because I was awarded a contract for 3 years. I think the first go at it was like 3 years. So I was awarded a contract for doing what I call these piping assemblies. We'll just leave it at that for customer discreetness sake. So I was welding sections of forgings and pipe together. So like elbows, T's, pieces of pipe beveled to make this layout of piping that handles natural gas. And there was a couple different sizes of them. I went through and did a what they call a FAI run. So first article inspection, you do one piece all the way from start to finish. You send it to them, they check it out and make sure that it's meeting the quality before they just let you go weld 1,000 of these or whatever the quantity is. So
Kosher.
Yeah, make sure it's kosher pickle. This is not an advertisement for kosher pickles. I actually don't even like pickles, but whatever. So except for the sweet and spicy ones, those are pretty good. I don't know who makes those, but those are pretty good.
Pickles. Not when you get the pickle
on
the side at the bar.
Yeah, no.
I don't like those, but like on a burger or something.
Yeah, this what do they call those, like spears or whatever? Those suck.
Long ass.
Yeah. Anyway, so I got through the FAI portion of that, and I say I because at this point it was literally just me. I was the, owner operator, you would say at that point. So got through that. They gave me the go ahead, and so now it's time to start busting these bad boys out. And so I think I had to do like 1 or 2 more pool jobs, but this contract was such a size where, this got to be a pretty big demand on my time. This was pretty much, a full-time deal. So not only did I get started with making those, but in order to make them at, the rate that we were shooting for, I even brought on a couple part-time people, which are now both employed at JR Metalworks. So that's Noah and Jimmy. So Noah, Noah did a pile of different stuff, but Noah can weld. And so he was doing some of that. I think Noah actually welded the first parts that came out of that shop down there with our gas drive stick welder. So that's getting a little bit ahead of the story here. So Jimmy is now our operations manager, and Noah is one of the welders. And, so they joined on a part-time basis at that point. This is in 2006. 2017, I think it would have been. So they joined on a part-time basis, helping prep parts, test the meat, test the piping after it's welded. Do some welding from time to time depending on what it was, and this got to be a decent sized operation to the point where now we get to the pivotal moment where Dad says, "Yo, this is too much in my garage. You got to get the hell out. Your rent free little enterprise has now reached the point where you're gonna have to acquire some space." So I went looking, and in our small little town and the surrounding areas, there wasn't much available. Not a whole lot sells around here or comes available. Definitely not many commercial properties. So I was looking at houses with shops basically, and I think I put offers in on 3 different places and they all fell through, which is really not great because I was trying to keep the business going and have a place to work. I'm sure Dad wouldn't have just said, "Well, you can't do it here anymore," but it was definitely becoming a point of contention at that spot in time there. So when all 3 of those fell through, I was pretty much left with no options because that was like everything that was on the market that had a shop. There was only one commercial building that was maybe potentially available that was anywhere near what I could afford. And that was the one that I mentioned that we were standing in, way back when. And I said, "Dad, I want to have a fab shop here someday," So that was his boat storage building. And I had a little leverage because he needed me out of his house shop, and he knew, he was working with me the whole time on trying to figure out, how to buy any of these other places. So like he knew it was either he's going to have to sell me that building or I was going to be in his home shop. So I kind of had a leg up at that point to get, some space, because he didn't want me at the house anymore. And so him and Mom must have talked about it, and I guess I convinced them, or they decided or whatever to sell it to me. So they did, and that was the beginning of a lot of really hard lessons for me, because now I had to go to the bank, get the loans for that. And at the time, if there's a way to like put some pictures of this, we'll have to dig those pictures up and put the old shop pictures in the episode somewhere. But the building was not in the best shape. So I always simply explain it by, you could walk in, look up, and see the sky. And you're not supposed to see the sky from inside of the building. There was rust holes in the walls. There was rust holes in the ceiling. The insulation was all but completely fallen out. There was no running water. There was barely enough electrical to, get the 4 light bulbs that were still working in there powered up. And it was a dump, but it was a roof over the boats that were stored there, and it kept the mice out somehow. So it worked for him, but it wasn't going to work for us. So I secured purchase orders with the customer that the piping assembly gig was through. So I had like a year's worth of purchase orders in my hand, and I went to the bank and I said, "All right, so I got this building. I got to fix it up. I got to get power in there. I got to get sewer, water, all that stuff. And this is my commitments from my customers." And because I had solid commitments from customers, PO was in hand, they gave me the money because I had no collateral to put up. Like I had, my truck at the time was probably like a $20,000 truck, and that was it. So that was really the only way that would have worked at the time. I would have had to have POs in hand, because knowing what I know now about getting financing and all that stuff, if you don't have anything for the bank to fall back against and the property is worth, nothing burger, like that's not going to work. So with the POs in hand for like a year's worth of work, and some rough estimates that I had gotten on what it's going to take to fix up the building, and I was going to do some of it myself, and we well, I was able to sign my life away with the bank here and get the money to fix it up. Well, that then began the whole, you're trying to run a business, you're trying to fix the building up, you're trying not to run out of money, and you have a lot of surprises that come up when you're fixing up a dilapidated dungeon like it was at the time. So, number one, the panel on the wall had a lock from the utility on it, so you couldn't get in it, and it said 400 amp service on the wall. So that was enough to run, a small scale, like couple person shop out of, with no like big equipment like lasers and stuff like we have now. So when we were fixing it all up, I was pulling OSB off the wall, and there's snake skins inside of it, and oh yeah. Jimmy, if you ask Jimmy, he was there for that. He'd remember that. We had to knock out cinder block walls, cover up the old openings to the septic system that was now not. It was, you couldn't have a septic system down there because city rules changed and stuff. So that was a stinky thing. We had, umpteen hours into doing as much of it myself / with the help of Jimmy and Noah as they came down on a part-time basis to still make some parts to make, get some money in and do all the work that it took to fix it up. One of the best stories outside of the snake skin and the wall things is, so the shop is in a low-lying area fairly close to a river, and because of that, and at that time the water table is pretty high, so anytime you dig a hole you hit water pretty quick, right? So we had to get water and sewer up into the building, and so we dug the hole outside of the building. We shot in the water and the sewer from, one from east and one from maybe south, got them to the point where they were up to the side of the building. So by shot them in, I mean we got a ditch witch and ran, what do they call that? Oh, we drilled and pulled in like 2-inch PVC, and we got them up to the side of the building. And so then, because this is an existing building, I had to cut a hole in the floor next to where these things were stubbed up outside of the building. And when I cut the hole in the concrete and then got into it, we used a hydrovac to suck out all the sand that was, in the way of me getting to the depth at which these pipes needed to come in through the wall. And there was so much water stuck inside of the building foundation that when we were sucking up the sand, it just kept falling in and in and in and in and in. So all the sand from under the slab, which is there to support the concrete, is now just getting sucked up in the hydrovac, and it was just a little Ditch Witch hydrovac. So pretty quickly that thing filled up, and I wound up just sticking shoring boards around this 2 foot by 2 foot square hole that I cut in, to then try to dig about 4 feet down so I could core drill a hole through the wall, pass the lines up through the wall of the building, and make a pretty hard 90-degree turn up to get them stubbed up into the building. Well, there was so much water in here, the Ditch Witch hydrovac sucked out as much as it could, but then that thing was full, and so then I was basically in there with a shovel, shoveling down to that 3-4 foot level where it was under freezing. That's where I wanted to core drill a hole and pass it in. So I borrowed Uncle Lonnie's core drilling drill. So it's got like a drill bit literally like this long, and it's basically a big hole saw. And there was so much water in the hole that I didn't have to use any water. Like, when you're cutting concrete, you add water so it's not dust everywhere. Well, there was so much water in this hole. I crawled down in the hole. I'm literally up to my waist in water. And thankfully, the Lonnie's, shout out to Uncle Lonnie. Lonnie's core drill was so long that the drill was still out of the water. But like, I'm literally squatting down inside of this hole up to my hips in water, and like my feet are jammed up against me, and I'm in between my legs trying to push this core drill through the wall at like an angle because I couldn't really get far enough down to where I was comfortable with being below freezing. So it took me like 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shot at the right angle to finally get it where it's all the way through the wall. Had to pull this big old freaking slug of concrete out that I cut out of there, and then I could pass the lines in. But like, I was literally, the drill was barely out of the water. I was past my hips in freaking water, sitting down there for what felt like a couple hours trying to drill this hole through. There's probably a lot better ways to do this, but I was like, early 20s at the time, didn't know any better, and I'm not afraid to, do whatever it takes kind of thing. And so we got the lines in, and that was at that point we could get pretty close to like having running water and a bathroom. So that was probably the last like really sucky moment of the build out. But that's one of those things that, man, you just never forget. Like, I didn't have any money to pay for it. We were doing it with like freaking pieces of plywood alongside of me for a shoring box, and up to my freaking gills in water, and like, those are striped earn moments that you just don't forget. So but at that point we could work towards having a bathroom and all that stuff, so that was really cool. But um so we fixed up the inside of the building only at first, just so that I could operate the business inside of there, but I didn't have enough money to do the outside, so that had to wait for another year or two. So we got the inside fixed up, and then like I had a certain amount of money from the bank based on what I thought it would take to fix this place up, and I ran into really big issues when we got into the electrical because if you recall, I had said that there was a 400 amp sticker on the main panel coming into the building. Well, it turns out the sticker was wrong. And so when we went to, pull all that electrical out of the main panel and, run the electrical around the building, there was only like, 200 amp service into the building, and that was not going to cut it. So all my electrical bids that I initially had were not going to suffice. So that costed a pile more. So that basically ate through all my savings that I had in addition to, whatever the bank gave me, which wasn't much, but now I was like really strapped. And so we got the building kind of fixed up where we could sort of operate out of the inside. We were operating and we were doing some work, getting some projects. The first winter came, and as I said, I was already really strapped for money because that whole electrical bugaboo that we found out about. And then spring came following winter. It was a pretty cold winter, so there was a good amount of frost, and the next really big problem happened. There's one door in and out of the building, the original building, as I'm sure you remember there.
Yep.
The driveway goes around the back, and so there's really not enough room in the front for a semi to turn around. If you do, it's really, really tight. So we set up a horseshoe driveway basically around to the back of the building, where then you can back into the building, unload the steel back there, whatever you got to do. Well, that whole back area, which was an added on parking lot, was not really like properly built. So it was pretty much you take 3/4 crush gravel and threw it on top of whatever was already sitting there. They pushed off the topsoil, but that was not sufficient for all these semis that were now driving over this. So next thing you know, I had semis literally falling into the great abyss. So what happens in wetland areas when, or I should say low-lying areas, whatever you want to say, when you put a bunch of weight on top of a crust, but there's a water layer under there, eventually that crust will break apart and that water will push its way to the top, and they call that pumping. So all of a sudden you'll drive over this and it looks like you're driving on a water bed. So I don't know if you ever seen that before. It still happens every once in a while if we drive on a new spot that's not properly, foundationed, if that's a word. If not, I just made it up. But that meant that I basically couldn't get semis in and out of there. And it got so bad that the skid steer that I had at the time, which had really aggressive tires and the whole bit, could barely get in and out of that back door because it pumped so much, it turned into basically soup behind the shop. And it was like 1.5 feet deep of this stuff. And so obviously if a skid steer can't go through, a semi definitely can't go through. And now how do you run your business? So we had to dig that out, which means that I got to dig down, over excavate a couple feet and put in like breaker run, which is like big rocks, and then put a proper top dressing of like 3/4 inch and a quarter crush on top of that so that you have a driveway again. But you have to dig way down. You got to haul this rock in. You got to buy all the rock. You got to get equipment to spread all the rock out. You got to set this to grade. And then you got to, do all this work to build your driveway back up from the negative amount that you dig it down. So, now we get to the point where our, tears flow, blood flows, the whole thing. It just, that sucked, man. But I had, my prized possession, that truck that I built when I was in high school, my 84 Chevrolet. Had to sell that to get money to, to do this. I hand built like everything on that truck from the ground up. It was completely restored. And so I had to sell that. If I sold that same truck now, it would sell for easily 35 grand. I sold it for $10,000 because that was what I could sell it for at the time. And so I got some money from that. And Uncle Lonnie here again saved the day by helping me dig this out and put it back in. But I think his bill to me was like 11 grand, but that must have been what it costed him and no more for that much rock. Cause I mean, the amount of rock we hauled in there was obscene because there was this huge, like probably 60-foot wide by like 40-foot deep area that had to be dug down 2 to 3 feet and have all this breaker run smashed in there. So he pretty much, I think, did it for cost for me. So he saved the day there again. And with selling the truck, I got enough money to make that go. But here, again, now I got no savings. I had to sell my prized possession truck. The business is, living on a day-to-day basis, and one thing after the next is going wrong, and I'm just, I'm out of shit to sell at this point. So if anything else big goes wrong, I'm really up shit creek. Not saying that I wasn't already up shit creek, but like I've got nothing left to sell at that point or anything. Like I'm just really fucked. So, we got through the driveway thing. It dried out. Other spots, were soupy, but like we could still get semis in and out. And then things came around a little bit, at least like they were survivable, we could at that point, focus on making some money. So we were just making those piping assemblies that we started with. We got into a little bit of sheet metal work, and then not long after we got into the sheet metal stuff, all of a sudden another big problem. So we were having a local place do the water jet cutting of all of our sheet metal stuff, and they decided that they were going to get rid of their water jet. So that is the Telechka family. Shout out to the Telechka family. So
Local monster truck drivers.
yeah, so MK Waterjet at the time turned into MK Motorsports. So they have monster trucks and actually race in Monster Jam and stuff now. So they pivoted a little bit with what they do, but when they pivoted, that left me in a pretty big predicament, because really they were the only business that was, local and could get our parts, cut for us fast enough, because we were doing really quick turnarounds on our sheet metal work that we were having them do, or plate, or whatever it was. And so, here we go, another one of these holy shit moments, but at the same time, a very big opportunity, just like in the last episode when I was talking about, running out of welding work and just taking it upon myself to do fitting work, except for I had a big price to pay for this one as far as money goes. So they decided that they were going to get rid of their water jet, and being the good people that they are, they weren't just going to poo-poo on me as far as, just get rid of it and say, tough luck. But they were going to get rid of it, and so they explained to me what was going on, and they gave me first crack at the water jet if I wanted it. So, yeah, didn't have any money. That was, a problem. Couldn't just decide to buy it. But I also didn't have a building that was big enough to fit the water jet, even if I was to, be the one to scoop it up. So I had a number of things to sort of work out. At the same time, I'm doing this sheet metal work. It's kind of getting on its feet, and it's looking like it's going to be a good enterprise for us down the line. Side note, that's the bulk of what we do now. But I had a very big decision to make, because I knew very certainly if I didn't get this water jet, we weren't going to be able to get that work done. So screw it. I'm in this far. Why not? Right? So I worked out a deal with the Telechkas, so we would run it out of their shop until I secured funds and built out an addition and could haul it down by us. So we ran it out of their shop for a while, and that's when me and Jimmy, somewhere along the line in there, me and Jimmy got to the point where Jimmy was working full time down by us, and he would work up there and run the water jet, and then that was probably 4 or 5 miles away, just outside of town, and the shop is in town, HQ as we call it now, the main building that we fixed up. So I would work out of there, he would work up by the water jet, and we would kind of pass parts, back and forth and get the stuff done. So we ran the water jet up there for a while, and then I was able to go to the bank and explain what went on, and they took another bet on me. Shout out Dave at Nicolay National Bank there for taking a couple different bets on me. And so I was able to get the funding and build an addition off the side of the building big enough to get this water jet in there. And it was kind of nice, because with building that addition, we could, put piping in the concrete and plan for this exact water jet to be in there. So it was set up pretty nice. We got it down in there, and we used Dad's semi on a weekend, and Big Mike came and helped. I rented a 10,000 pound capacity telehandler. And so we emptied the water jet out, loaded it up on a flatbed we borrowed from Skeeter. Used dad's semi, carted all that shit down there and unloaded it and crab crawled that telehandler into the building to then set the water jet in place. But boy, was that tight. The telehandler was necessary because he had to crab crawl and kind of do it all on an angle and then snake it in around, especially that post that's just to the left of it there. So we got it in and started running it out of there. And that was the beginning of really being able to like get our feet under us as a fab shop. We were doing some piping, we were doing some sheet metal work, and with that, we were all in one spot so we could work fairly efficiently. And I'm used to saying we all now, but it was me and Jimmy at the time, so it makes it sound like a bigger thing than what it was at the time. But we could work out of one place. We could not have to shuffle material back and forth, and it was a much better operation. And it was something where you could bring a customer in and show them what you got, and it's not completely embarrassing at this point, because I mean, honestly, that was some of the toughest times in the beginning. Was not only do I have all this stuff going on in the background, like being broke and then winding up broker, and then now having to take on a pile of debt, and you got all that weighing on you, but then at the same time you're trying to convince people to do their projects for them so you can make money with all this. And when you look at the reality of the situation, you drive a half hour away to Green Bay and there's all those fancy fab shops that have 15,000 plus square feet, laser cutters, fancy electric press brakes, punches, shears. They got everything under the sun. And even at my best day, when I had the water jet down there, you were like not even hardly a fly on the wall. You were like a dead fly on the windowsill. So to conclude sort of the gritty part of the how I got started story, the hardest part about all that is, even after you go through and you stretch yourself to the absolute max, you do the most that you can with what you got, you still have to stand there, look somebody in the eye, and try to convince them to choose you as their source of parts to be made, while at the same time just being a realist, working with real things every day. That's how most of us are. It's like, at the same time that they could go to another shop and get access to laser cutters, press brakes, all the stuff that they have, 100-person workforce, as opposed to your 1.5 or 2, depending on if Jimmy was out of school that day or not. And man, that is tough, because you want to feel good about what you're trying to sell somebody, but you just know that you're so far behind the 8 ball, it's not even funny. So you feel like you're asking for favors. And the only way that you could feel that there's at least a little less of that is by telling them, like, look, I know that on every other shop tour, when you go, check out somebody else's facility, you're more impressed than you are here, if you're impressed at all. I'd be surprised if you could say you're impressed at all. But what I will do is make sure that I personally take care of you better than they will over there. That's the one thing that you can promise them, that you actually have control of, to hold your word, because you're not going to be able to go buy a new press brake. That's the most efficient thing. You're not going to go, buy a new laser. That's the most efficient thing. That stuff we have now, but at the time it wasn't even like a thought. And so all you can do is really, trim your labor rate down to a number that's very attractive to them, which is, trimming your own hair, basically, in a not good way. And, you're cutting the money you're taking home to your family down. And you're just promising to be at their beck and call for a shot at earning their business, which isn't a bad thing. As far as the being at their beck and call isn't a bad thing, but you open yourself up to be taken advantage of ultimately, because you need it so bad. And there's there's people out there that will take advantage of you, and there's people that won't, and you just got to kind of weed through that as time goes by and put up boundaries and work through all that, which we'll talk about more in other episodes. But it's a tough spot to be when you just are so far behind the rest of everybody, even after you stretch yourself to the absolute max, and you want to feel good about what you're offering somebody, but at the same time, that it's a lot less. So what you can do is you can promise your personality, you can commit to working the hardest that you possibly could for them, and make sure that they know that you're going to take care of them, right, wrong, or indifferent. And doing that for a couple years is a big part of the reason that now we have the new laser, the new press brake, all that stuff. And while we're not the biggest entity in the entire world, that's not so much the goal. It's really to be the best that you can be at any phase. Looking back at it now, if somebody asked me like how to get through that, it's just know what you have to leverage at that point in time and maximize that, because you've only got the levers that you have depending on where you're at. And number one, make sure you give credit where credit's due, as far as realizing what you do have as an advantage. For example, when you're small, you can move very quick to adapt to customer changes. That doesn't work that way when you're big. It gets slower and slower exponentially, even the bigger you get. And you can put your personal guarantee on stuff because you're so involved with everything that goes on. Nothing will miss your radar. So you can honestly say, hey, I'll take care of you better than anybody else will, because I'm going to give a hoot more than anybody else will. Because if I don't, and I don't take care of you and you leave me as a customer, I'm going to lose everything that I have. And I just can't do that. So, know where you're at, appreciate where you're at, and offer that. And you multiply that over a few years. And, in our case, in a matter of a handful of years, we went from just me and Jimmy to now me, Jimmy, and like 50 other people here, including our entire family, as we alluded to in the last podcast. And, that's where you can look back and you can really appreciate those days and be glad that you didn't quit, you didn't give up, and you took the risk in the first place. Because without the risk in the first place, well, then you don't have all this cool stuff to look back at someday and say, well, that sucked, but we made it through it, now we can laugh about it. So that's kind of the gritty part of the story. And there's a lot of nuance that comes after that, which I want to dig into as we continue to kind of talk about this stuff. But going from zero to at least something that you could see on a map and be proud of is the gritty part for everybody. So I wanted to kind of highlight that in its own little segment here. So with that, I definitely need to take a little sip of my trusty energy drink and hand it off to whatever questions you got at this point. I saw you writing some stuff down there.
How many years is it? How many years has it been? 7?
So I made the LLC in 2016, which is when I went and worked on the road doing the pool stuff, and then bought the business. Noah and I were just talking about this the other day. I think I bought the shop in like 17, so 2017, and then 2018, 2019 was kind of like the me and Jimmy, getting the water jet set up and all that type of stuff. And so, it's 2020, 21 is when we really started to like hire people. So it's been over the past 4-ish years that we went from like 2 people to like 50.
All right. What's your favorite memory from like the holes in the ceiling phase?
I'm just going to say the first thing that comes to my head. It's really cool now being able to look back at the people that I work with now are some of the people that were like here literally from ground zero, being like Noah and Jimmy. So there's a couple things that come to mind. The first thing that came to my mind was when Noah and I knocked the wall out between what would have been the first inspection room / Thunderdome that joins up with the office, and then put the I-beam up. I remember we were doing, so like you knock the cinder block wall out, and then we had an I-beam that Noah had spliced together, and we had to put that up there to support that wall. So we knocked the wall, we put some temp bracing in, and then Noah's in the skid steer lifting it up. And I remember being up on this ladder just swearing a blue streak because I couldn't get the column bolts to line up, and it was just because the skid steer was way too damn small, and we were crammed in a tiny little space trying to swing a big ass I-beam in there, and just blue collar hard work type stuff. And I just I remember swearing like crazy at that bolt, trying to get that thing in, and losing my cool a little bit, and looking back down. Like I was up on the ladder, and I turned around and I looked at Noah, and I just never forget, he was just kind of looking up at me like, just waiting to do the next thing. And you have those people there that at the time you're just going through and doing the shit that you need to do, but you look back at it, and especially when Noah joined full time and stuff later on down the line, you just don't forget the people in those moments where, man, shit was hard and you were out of money and life just seemed pretty fucking difficult, but they were with you the whole time, and then they thought enough of you, having been with you through all that shit, to then join the party later on, and they bet on you to put food on the table for their family, and they've been with you from the start. And those are the kind of people and things that you just don't forget, because it means so much that that they saw all that, and it wasn't easy, and they didn't fucking quit on you. And that's the kind of stuff that just never leaves you. So that came to mind as one of the more trying times. But one of the other thing that comes to mind is, Jimmy and we did like this photo shoot one day out of the shop. Him and we set the shop up to really like highlight all the piping assembly stuff that we do, because we were trying to get more of that work. So, we're trying to like make this company brochure look legit, but we only have 2 people to take pictures of. So we're trying to like, take pictures of all these areas of the shop and the work that we do. But, you got to almost like crop our heads up and hope that Jimmy's arms look different and thing to thing, because otherwise it's Jimmy in every single picture. And, so again, looking back at it at the time, it was kind of like, in my head anyway, Jimmy's real go with the flow, but in my head, I was like trying to make it look like something that it wasn't, trying to make it look bigger than it was. But knowing what I know now, again, if somebody asked me about that, we would just call a spade and leverage where we were at, because, you have the things that you have, which is like hey, I'll personally take care of you, and I know everything that goes on in this place. And, if it takes me showing up on a Sunday to get your shit done so that it gets done, like, I'll do it. And those are the things that just don't happen that way when you have a big enterprise and you're in charge of, all these other things, because you just can't do it all anymore. And so, thinking about that, I remember looking at all these pictures of Jimmy doing all these different things and trying to like piece it together in my head of how we would make it look like this big enterprise that was making all these assemblies and da 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 da. And, here again, Jimmy's been with me through a lot, especially being the first full-time guy. And here again, he's stuck with me. He's still here, and he's always been like, a perfect yin to the yang, so to speak, because I'm like wired tight a lot, have a tendency to run hot for sure. And Jimmy's just like cool as a cucumber all the time. So, when I needed some balance, Jimmy was always there and balanced me out. And I mean, he's been there for umpteen of these. Like we worked till midnight nights that we had so many of, especially in the first couple years after we got that water jet and stuff. And then the damn thing would break and we'd have to figure out how to fix it. And, it was always something. And um, so really, that's a long ass answer to a question of, the memories that I have most of that is more so about, the people that were there with me and stuck it out and are still around today, which it really was just like me, Jimmy, and Noah. Those were the people that were around at that time. You were a little baby. And dad and mom kind of let me, they strategically let me do my own thing because they knew that if they were there helping me a bunch, that I would kind of have this weird like guilt complex about it where I would not feel like I did it all because they helped me out and stuff. And, they were right because that's just how I was wired at that point in time. But now, like years later, I was so happy to have them be part of the business. It's funny how that stuff changes, but they intentionally didn't get really involved at that point because they knew that that's how I would wind up feeling. So it was pretty much just me and Jimmy and Noah. And, we worked with the contractors and stuff and did all that we could do to save as many pennies as we could and start doing some work. And, shortly after that, like Phil and Matt joined and, a bunch of guys like that. And a lot of those guys are still here today as well. So as we dive further and further into the story, over the time that we do this, we'll highlight some of those other people that joined later on down the line, but a lot of them are still here today, especially like the OGs.
That was a pretty long-winded answer.
I'm good at that, if you call that good.
How often, if any, I mean, like how often did you think about quitting when you really got into the bulk of starting the business out of the parent shop? Found out how much it costs, how long you're there.
To be honest with you, in the very beginning, I was so full of piss and vinegar that it really didn't even occur to me. And there was, I don't know how many years I literally worked 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, like average. So you were just so busy and focused on doing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And there were so many next things to do that it really didn't cross my mind much. But as things settled down a little bit later, and the money got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, that's when those thoughts started to creep in a little bit more. And it's funny because, I say fairly frequently when I have conversations like this now where, if I would have known how hard it actually was going to be to do all that and how much time and effort and, of my life I would sacrifice and put into it just to make it work at all. I don't know that I would have done it. Especially if it was a little later in life. Younger in life, I was just so ignorant that like I said, I didn't really think about that type of deal much. But if I was later in life or like had kids or any of that, I was just talking to Langer about this yesterday or the other day. Like, if I really knew what it was going to take, I wouldn't have done it because you look at how much that takes away from being able to be there around, Mama Bear and the kids and all that stuff. Like it, if you really honestly knew how much time it would take away from that, you would have a hard time dealing with your conscience of like, yep, well, I'm not going to be around that much. But not knowing and then getting into it so far that you can't turn back is usually how people wind up getting into that spot where you just don't have any other fucking choice. So you got to keep going. And so when I got to the later stages, that's kind of where it was like, Jesus, if I did all this, you look back at it and it's like, if I did all this again, or if I knew what I was getting into, would I have even done this again? And da da da. And it just doesn't really matter. I don't really think about it much. I think that's something that Dad instilled in me from, I had a lot of late nights with him at work, and you just don't fucking quit. It's just not an option, So when it's not an option, then it doesn't occupy much space in your mind.
It reminds me of the first time I asked Dad if we could leave at 5, which is when his employees left. And he told me no, obviously he had stuff to do. And that kind of woke me up for the first time when I was 10, maybe. I'm guessing I was about that. And it just kind of woke me up to how hard he worked. And I mean, he was never home at 5 or, whenever everybody else ended. It was 12 to 15 hours. And that's, you're just looking at hours there, not even including the stress that comes with that. But that's what it takes.
I think when you hit a point where you really like believe in what you're doing, you know why you're going there. You know why you're doing what you're doing. Or if your name is on the door and your house is on the line, that's also a very easy way to switch gears. But ultimately, when you get into, like our management level people here, I explain things very simply. It's not about the time that you put in, it's about the results that you get. So as far as I'm concerned, we set up the expectation and results they're needing to get so that the company and they get to where they need to go as far as, in the chronological order that we're trying to accomplish. And when they achieve the result, they're done. Then their day is done. But if the result is not achieved, then we do what it takes to get there. And so there's going to be days where it might come easier. There's going to be days where it might come harder, but the expectation is that the result is hit. And so it's really like a switching of mindset from like, oh, well, I did my time to, well, is the job done? But the beauty of the flip side of the coin, so to speak, is if you're looking at it from a results standpoint, as far as if that's where you hang your hat at the end of the day, the more effective you are and the more of a weapon you turn yourself into by just making yourself better in all ways, shapes, and forms, the less time it takes you to get the shit done. So you can get, if you're looking for results and you're tied to the results with your comp, if you're the owner or you're, tied into the business with, prorated comp based on performance, ultimately you can boil it down to you got to do less to make more, as far as money, as far as time back, all those things get to be more in your favor when you learn to turn yourself into a lean, mean results machine, because then you're not trading an equal amount of 40 hours for X number of dollars. You're trading maybe half of that for maybe even double the dollars. The better you get, the better that ratio gets. So it's more flipping gear in your head from, how much time equates to how much dollars to how little time equates to how many dollars. / time back at home with your family. They work the same.
You were talking about, customers coming through the shop and seeing how little was there.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have had like imposter syndrome, quote unquote, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Imposter syndrome. That's a phrase I haven't contemplated in a while. Imposter syndrome is, I would define it for those who are listening who haven't heard it, as like feeling like a fraud in your endeavor to do whatever it is you're doing. So just feeling not worthy of whatever it is you're trying to achieve, and in that case, that's definitely fitting the bill for that, because you're like asking for the business, but at the same time you're going, well, I don't know why the fuck this guy would do it, but you have to because you need the money, so like you have your inner psyche working against you, even though the money situation dictates that you must get this business. but you just really don't believe in the fact that you're worthy of it because, you know, again, you look around and everybody else is got double, quadruple, or tenfold of everything that I have, from manpower to machines and everything in between. So, you know, absolutely, you definitely feel imposter syndrome, but at the same time, it boils down to you. Yeah, you feel a lot of things along the way, but here again, you work in the world of results, and all that shit just doesn't matter because you just have to get it done. You have to make the money, you have to deliver for the customer, you have to pay your bills, and you won't pay your bills if you don't deliver for the customer. So you just wind up doubling down on the bets on yourself and just figure out a way to make it happen, you know. And you wind up with smaller projects, you know, everything is in proportion. So the stuff that they put in front of you ultimately is stuff that you can handle. And, you know, the good Lord never drops anything in your lap that he doesn't think you can handle. It's just whether you hold up to the task or not. That's on you. So, um, but all that, you know, calluses you into the point where, like I said, you get to a point where you really feel like whatever is dropped in front of you, like I don't need to know all the answers going into any room or any situation, because I know that I've figured out a lot of shit to get to this point, and I will continue to do whatever it takes to figure out whatever needs to be figured out to get to the next step. And that's just all I need to know. And so, you know, it's all part of a process to get you to that point. But at the time, yeah, there's a lot of shit going through your head. If you call it imposter syndrome or feeling like a fraud or whatever, like, yeah, all that is applicable, but it just doesn't matter because you got to do what you got to do.
So you don't feel it at all anymore.
No, I wouldn't even say that. But I think what happens over time is, if you're self aware, then you can recognize and sort of compensate for those things that pop into your head. So you need to become aware of what's going on in your own brain to be able to do something about it. And so if you do then pay attention to the thoughts that are going in and out of your head, and then you realize, oh yeah, like I'm doing this fucking thing again where I feel like I don't deserve this, but really when you think about it, like, I've worked harder than anybody that I know. So, you know what? If somebody deserves it, damn it, it's me. So there's this proving process that happens in time that makes that imposter syndrome thing, when you process that in your brain, like when you've really worked your ass off, the more and more and more time and, sacrifices that you make, you can draw a very logical case in your brain as to why you should, deserve something good for all that. So that helps. But at the same time, too, when you become aware of that, then you can trigger that logical conversation, talk yourself out of it, and then deal with it in a way that is in accordance with you and your personality, because everybody's different. So like, some people want to be, hyped up in that point. Well, I don't deal in fake shit. So like, don't tell me I'm something I'm not. That doesn't help me. I deal in facts. And so for me, when I've got, 10 years behind me of legitimately busting my face and doing whatever the fuck it took to make this work, I just look back and I'm like, well, shit, you know, I've worked harder than literally anybody that I know for longer than anybody that I know that's my age. And so, this thing is, going on, and I'm feeling like I'm not worthy, but damn it, if anybody is, it's me. So like, I don't need a pep talk. I don't need any of that shit. I just look back at my track record and say, you know what, if somebody's going to get this, it should be me, because I worked harder than anybody else. And, I did it with good intention. I did it to help my family. I did it to help other people's families. So there's really nothing here that's working against me. And so for me, the logical case is how I can talk myself out of that, because in time you realize that stuff never goes away. It's just that you can recognize it quicker, and you can talk yourself off the ledge, so to speak, in a lot less time. So you don't sit there and dwell on it and waste a bunch of time.
Well, that's a wrap on all my questions.
Bam.
Boom.
That concludes that concludes this episode then, I guess. Thank you for the well thought out questions. I appreciate it.
I try to think.
It works. You done good.
Gracias.
Now go build something, people.